What makes a psychopath a psychopath? Why is it different from antisocial personality disorder? Let's discuss this in depth. In Hare and Newman's four-factor model of psychopathy, psychopathy is further broken down into four primary dimensions. Factor 1, interpersonal. This includes superficial and glib charm, a grandiose sense of self-worth, pathological lying. Factor 2, affective. Lack of remorse or guilt, shallow affect, callousness, lack of empathy, failure to take responsibility for one's actions. Factor 3, lifestyle, need for constant stimulation, proneness to boredom, impulsivity, irresponsibility, promiscuous sexual behavior, parasitic lifestyle where they leech off others, a lack of realistic goals and inability to keep jobs. Factor 4, antisocial, impaired behavioral controls, early behavior problems, juvenile delinquency. Two of these factors, the interpersonal and affective, are especially important to consider when it comes to the interpersonal exploitation and aggression of the psychopath in intimate relationships. And it's the severity of the callous and emotional traits in these two factors that also distinguish the psychopath from just the behaviors of antisocial personality disorder. For example, people with higher levels of factor 1 traits of psychopathy tend to show diminished physiological and neural responses to cues that are meant to induce emotions, including cues that reveal the distress of other people. What happens when you're dealing with someone on the more dangerous and potentially violent end of the spectrum? Antisocial personality disorder is characterized by numerous deficits in empathy, conscience, moral decision-making, and impulsivity. An individual with antisocial personality disorder has a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others. This can include traits such as the failure to conform to social norms, deceitfulness, impulsivity, irritability, aggressiveness, and lack of remorse, with these behaviors often occurring since age 15 and meeting the criteria for conduct disorder. In the DSM-5, antisocial personality disorder is noted as an umbrella term that can also be referred to as sociopathy or psychopathy. Sociopathy and psychopathy do not have their own separate diagnoses or mentions in the DSM-5 aside from this mention. However, the term psychopath is used by researchers and clinicians frequently across correctional and legal contexts. The broader research literature tends to distinguish between antisocial personality disorder on its own and the term psychopath. Psychologists have argued that someone can hypothetically meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, but may not be a full-fledged psychopath. For example, they may meet the criteria for violating the law, but not necessarily have a lack of remorse. They may meet the minimum criteria for ASPD, but again, may not meet the full criteria for being a full-fledged psychopath. The DSM-5 diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder tends to emphasize more law-breaking behavior, which may not apply to every single psychopath. Psychopathy is better measured using Dr. Robert Hare's 20-item psychopathy checklist revised, PCLR, a measure that includes more of the callous, unemotional features of psychopathy. In short, not all those who meet the criteria for ASPD, antisocial personality disorder, will be full-fledged psychopaths. Less emotionally responsive in their brain. Of course, they can also try to manufacture these responses and try to pretend they feel emotions, but usually they're not naturally feeling these emotions towards the distress or pain of others. This lack of reactivity to the emotions and distress of others may be in part why psychopaths are able to engage in so much aggression against others without inhibition and without empathizing with their victims. However, keep in mind this does not excuse their behavior. Ultimately, they intellectually know the difference between right and wrong, have the cognitive empathy and capacity to choose differently, and are still responsible for their decisions. You may have noticed that the psychopath in your life was not only unable to empathize or be remorseful, but that they also committed egregious moral transgressions without thinking twice, engaging in lying, cheating, or other exploitative behaviors that would cause regular people to feel guilty and ashamed. Psychopaths reason differently when it comes to moral dilemmas. What fMRI neuroscience studies suggest is that areas of the brain constituting the moral neural network play a key role in moral reasoning and are activated differently in psychopaths when they're considering moral dilemmas in ways that may contribute to why they dehumanize and exploit others so easily. For example, Desity and colleagues examined the neural responses of psychopaths to the distress and pain of others. What they discovered was shocking. When 121 incarcerated males viewed images depicting bodily injuries and were asked to take the perspective of another person suffering these injuries, they showed an atypical response in certain areas of the brain involved in empathy for pain, even though they showed a typical empathic response for themselves when they were asked to imagine the injury happening to them. This study indicated that when psychopathic individuals imagine others enduring pain, there is an increased activation in areas of the brain related to anticipation of reward and decreased activation in the brain in areas related to empathy. Psychologists have suggested that this may mean that psychopaths not only lack empathy for the pain of others, but they may also take sadistic pleasure in witnessing or even causing the pain and distress of others on purpose to gain pleasure themselves. This is why you may have witnessed a psychopathic individuals seem especially pleased to cause you pain or go out of their way to partake in actions they knew would harm you. They also experience duping delight when they tend to one-up you in their games and deceive you, pulling the wool over your eyes and hiding in plain sight. Psychopaths are also more likely to lie more frequently than narcissists, experience more positive emotions or duping delight and a thrill when they con others, and lie for no reason at all, whereas narcissistic individuals tend to lie primarily for self-gain. Individuals with higher levels of psychopathy also tend to have reduced activity in the anterior cingulate cortex when engaging in opportunities for personal gain by using dishonesty, all while presenting a false charismatic mask in order to lure others into their facade. Primary and secondary psychopathy. There tends to be two main types of psychopaths. Seem to have been cold and callous since they were young. They don't get stressed out as easily. They also have traits of antagonism and fearlessness. Some of these individuals from this group may be found in more successful careers. Maybe they're the CEO of a company, a doctor, a psychiatrist, a lawyer, or nurse who preys on vulnerable populations, weaponizing their position and assumed authority and credibility to get ahead. Yet they come from a stable upbringing, so there doesn't always seem to be a reason for why they are the way they are. These psychopaths are thought to be born rather than made due to their biological predisposition toward psychopathy and callous unemotional traits. If you want to learn more about the manipulation tactics of narcissistic and psychopathic individuals, be sure to check out my book, Breaking Trauma Bonds with Narcissists and Psychopaths, available in all major bookstores, including your local Barnes and Noble. Application of conditional release, criminal versatility, and this may apply more so to the secondary, impulsive, hot-headed variant of psychopathy, which is known as the sociopath, colloquially. And the sociopath is actually more similar to what we see in the DSM-5 description of antisocial personality disorder. And these types do not tend to have as much of a biological predisposition and callous and emotional traits as the primary variant of psychopathy. The reason narcissists know exactly which trigger buttons to push is because they installed them in the first place. Unbeknownst to you, they have identified which trigger phrases, events, insecurities to mention in order to provoke and unsettle you, depicting you as crazy or unhinged when you finally do react. During the abuse cycle, they implant insecurities in you, manufacture fabricated flaws, nitpick, and move the goalposts, and watch you unravel as you fixate on regaining their approval. They do this so chronically that you are constantly scrambling to defend, react, and over-explain yourself, becoming too exhausted to detach from the actual relationship that is harming you. By manufacturing chaos through provoking you, they gain leverage. As you spend most of your time and energy navigating their diversion tactics, defending yourself against their ludicrous claims, and trying to skirt their sabotage, they take up your mental resources so that you are only focused on them and the relationship, and you have far less time for yourself, your goals, your healing, and your self-care.